Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar today. Today's topic is HIPAA Omnibus, how to do security risk analysis for HIPAA. My name is Anupam Sahai. I'm co-founder and CEO of Edify Incorporated. My background is that I have been in the area of healthcare IT, cloud computing, security and compliance and networking for about 25 plus years. I have a number of patents and have been in the high-tech industry for as long as about 25 plus years. So the today's topic, as I mentioned earlier, is about HIPAA Omnibus, how to do security risk analysis. So I will start out by talking about the changes that took place with the enactment of HIPAA Omnibus. This was in September 2013. And what does it imply for medical providers, business associates, and subcontractors? So I will cover those topics as a background information, and then talk about meaningful use analysis and risk analysis, which are kind of associated, as doing security risk analysis is one of the key requirements for meaningful use attestation. And I'll take you through the process of achieving and doing security risk analysis. And a lot of this is done today manually or not done at all, or misunderstood perhaps. So I will also talk about Edify, which is an automated tool for assessing and maintaining your HIPAA compliance status and also your risk analysis. At the end, we will open it up for Q&A. So please feel free to type in your questions at the during the session or near the end of the session. Some housekeeping stuff. We will be recording this webinar, and you will have access to the webinar within 2 to 3 business days via an email. If you want a copy of the slides, please drop me a note. You'll find my contact information near the end of the webinar as well. We appreciate you joining the webinar today, and we would love to hear back from you with respect to your feedback. So let's get started. So a number of you know that HIPAA Omnibus was enacted in September 2013. And this is really a result of a number of regulations that came before it. HIPAA as such was enacted in 1996, and then HITECH was the follow-up regulation that was enacted in 2009. And really HIPAA Omnibus is reinforcing what was brought about by HITECH in 2009. And so some of the changes in HIPAA Omnibus is a result of discussion and feedback and finalization over the last 15, 16 years. So from an impact perspective, HIPAA Omnibus has changed a number of things. Firstly, it has brought about the business associates and vendors in the scope of compliance. So now not only the covered entities, but business associates and vendors and subcontractors need to be HIPAA compliant. And it goes even further to say that both the covered entities and business associates have a shared responsibility and shared liability in case a breach happens or if they get audited and are found to not be compliant. So the covered entities could earlier shirk off their responsibility or shift the responsibility to a BA by getting a business associate agreement in place, but no longer that's the case. So covered entities have being the originator of an original custodian of the patient health information, the covered entities have to be proactive and make sure that all the downstream entities, whether it's business associates or vendors, are HIPAA compliant. Otherwise, they can be held responsible and liable. The enforcements also have so now the enforcement and audits can also be done not just by the federal entities, but state auditor generals can also call for an audit. And one of the biggest changes that came about with high-tech and with HIPAA Omnibus was that the fines have increased for negligence. So there are different tiers of penalties, and the highest tier is what is called when you do willful neglect. And under willful neglect, the maximum fine per incident is about $1.5 million and with no upper limit. So if you have multiple incidents of violations and that you haven't taken steps to do anything from a HIPAA compliance perspective, the fines can easily stack up. And if there's any misrepresentation, there's potential criminal prosecution. In fact, recently there were a number of articles on the chief information officers going to jail because they had incorrectly testified that they had done risk analysis for meaningful use attestation dollars. So this is very serious. The fines are very high. There's potential criminal prosecution in case the law is not obeyed or misused. There's also an incentive scheme that is put together by HHS and Office of Civil Rights, where if they enforce and audit any entities that are found and fined, they get to keep the money. So there is incentive for them to audit entities, and there's also a whistleblower clause that allows inside employees or anybody else to refer a particular medical business to HHS for them to get audited, and they get to share the part of the proceeds. So there's an incentive scheme put in place by the law that encourages not just the businesses but also people who are around them to make sure that everybody is following the law. There are other changes with respect to data breach notification requirements. Now, the requirements have been put in place and it's very stringent. There is a 60-day notice where if there's a breach that involves more than 500 records, the covered entities or the business associate that got impacted need to report it to the government. It gets displayed in the HHS, what is called the wall of shame, which has all the breach records notified and published online. So this is very important. Earlier, there was some kind of a harm clause where you could delay the communication to HHS if you deemed that it was not causing sufficient harm. Now the guidance is that you report it to HHS and then you can do the harm analysis to figure out what's the extent of damage. And finally, the risk analysis, which was mandated in the HIPAA law and the high-tech law, is absolutely required. And that's really the subject of our discussion today, is to be able to perform security risk analysis not just one time, but do it in an ongoing fashion by putting together a comprehensive and robust security program to deal with HIPAA compliance issues. So some clarification on terminology, which so that we are all on the same page. The definition of a business associate who is now part of the compliance umbrella, HIPAA compliance umbrella, is any entity that handles PHI information. It could be lawyers, it could be accountants, it could be electronic medical record providers, it could be garbage disposal entities that have access to PHI. So anybody and everybody that has access to PHI information is considered to be a BA, and they need to be compliant with HIPAA. So while you have about 800,000 covered entities, there are about 1.2 million business associates. And so roughly about 2 million entities need to be HIPAA compliant. And the covered entities have to be proactive to ensure that all their BAs that they work with are indeed compliant. So the question becomes, why should we care? If you are a covered entity and a business associate, is this problem real? Yes, it is, and it's coming from multiple angles, perspectives. So one perspective is that cyber attackers and cyber terrorism, these folks are targeting healthcare businesses. If you look at the 2014 statistics, roughly about 40% of businesses that were targeted were healthcare businesses. And this is because healthcare PHI information is very valuable in the underground market. And this is growing roughly about 100% year over year. This is a serious problem where breaches are happening, and they range from small to large businesses. It's really not differentiating. What is very clear is that the value of PHI market in the underground market is very high. So there is an Amazon-like marketplace, believe it or not, for PHI information trading. And so healthcare businesses are under attack. Not to mention that this is the law. This is also required for meaningful use attestation, where the government is giving out money, federal stimulus money of $28 billion to enforce HIPAA, to do risk analysis. And not only that, the Office of Civil Rights, which is the enforcement agency of the government, is going to be conducting random audits, roughly covering about 5% of the medical organizations. And these are going to be both covered entities and business associates, just like the IRS, where they do a similar audit. So it's in the same philosophy as that of an IRS. And just like you don't want to be caught evading taxes or not filing taxes, similarly, HIPAA is in a similar boat. So let's jump to the topic right away. So what does HIPAA security risk analysis entail? And if you look at the legalese coming from HIPAA, this is what it says. It's section 164.308 A12A. And what the guidance is that there's a need to conduct an accurate and thorough assessment of the potential risk and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of electronic protected health information by the organization, held by the organization. So that's the guidance for risk analysis. But in the call today, in the webinar today, we will demystify this and explain it very clearly, hopefully, that what does it entail and how to go about doing it. So the reason why security risk analysis is important is not just for healthcare businesses. Any business that cares about security, that cares about protecting its critical assets, need to do a risk analysis. And risk analysis is really is a way to identify weak links in the organization and their adverse impact. And the weak links could essentially be people related, it could be process related, or it could be IT related. Any kind of weaknesses that can be exploited by attackers. And attackers could be insiders or it could be outsiders. And so any weak links that can be exploited by attackers and thereby cause adverse impact needs to be assessed. And that's what risk analysis is doing. So one way to think about risk analysis is that it's looking at all the critical assets in the organization. And if you're a healthcare organization, your critical assets could be related to all the IT assets and non-IT assets or processes that are protecting PHI information, protected health information that you have acquired from customers or through other entities like a covered entity if you're a BA. So you are looking at a organizational map for identifying security gaps that exist that could lead to somebody exploiting and compromising the data, the critical assets. You're looking at threats and vulnerabilities. Threats are, as I said, attacks that can happen by insiders or external forces or attackers. And these threats are typically exploiting vulnerabilities which are showing up because of security gaps in the organization. And once they exploit it, we need to understand the impact that this would have in the organization. And so all of this combined together provides an accurate map or a risk exposure level for the organization. And failure to conduct risk analysis, if you get breached, the statistics out there which tell us that the average cost of a breach is very high. It runs into millions of dollars. This is the average cost, $5.5 million, and roughly it's a function of the number of records that you have stored inside the company or the value of the critical assets. So typically the cost of an average record stolen, healthcare record stolen, is about $200. So if you lose thousand records or 2,000 records, you can multiply it with that number and you get a pretty hefty amount that will be the cost of dealing with such a breach. Not to mention the brand damage and the other liability that comes along with it. And security risk analysis is required by any regulation that concerns itself with security or protecting of any critical asset, whether it's HIPAA, PCI, FISMA, SANS 20, you name it, everybody would have some degree of risk analysis built into the recommendation. So if we go to the next level of detail, what risk management is doing is it's doing really three things. One is that you're trying to look at all the critical assets in the organization, and then you're assessing for those critical assets, what are the threats and vulnerabilities that can affect and compromise those assets, and the likelihood impact of those assets being compromised is also assessed. And once you do that risk assessment, then the next step is to do risk mitigation, which is to fix the problems that are found. So you're looking at these three different stages of evaluation, assessment, and risk mitigation. And this cycle needs to be repeated in an ongoing fashion because threats are evolving by the day. There are new vulnerabilities that are discovered pretty much on a daily basis. And so the external environment is changing. The organization could also be changing. You might be bringing in new employees, new IT assets or non-IT assets. So there's a need to constantly stay on top of any changes that are happening on a daily basis. So what I said earlier is really captured in this flow diagram in terms of a risk management model. Any risk management model that's mature would have these 6 things incorporated or evaluated as part of a risk management process. I mentioned about threat sources that could potentially be affecting critical assets. These threat sources use threat events, which are really a set of activities or actions that are exploiting weak links or vulnerabilities in the organization and thereby causing adverse impact. And the impact needs to be assessed to understand what the overall risk status is. The likelihood of this threat happening is also an important factor. So for example, if you are in an earthquake-prone zone, that's a threat where if an earthquake happens, your business might be non-operational or might disappear or go away. And so that's a valid threat source, but it's got some reasonable probability depending on which part of the country you are in. Here in California, that's we are told that the big one is coming. So the likelihood of that threat is an important factor when you're considering the impact and likelihood go together. Similarly, if you have an IT asset sitting on the internet, not protected by a firewall, that's a threat that could be exploited by exploiting some vulnerabilities, and the likelihood of that happening might be pretty high. So all of these factors are part of risk management and risk assessment, and the safeguards that the organization really has are these security controls that are really the walls or the controls that the business has put up to prevent or to retard these attackers from coming in and exploiting. So the predisposing conditions and the security controls are really the negative forces that are retarding these exploitation and impact to the risk. And this all together combines and puts together the overall risk score or risk level for the organization. So if you break it down further, as we will continue to do as we move forward, what we are looking at, if we go back to HIPAA Omnibus, what we are looking at from a organization perspective is that if organizations have to be HIPAA compliant, they need to do HIPAA assessment to get certified or to meet all the HIPAA requirements. They need to scan all PHI assets, which means that if they have IT assets that are sitting inside the company, outside the company, they need to be scanned for vulnerability so that they cannot be exploited or compromised, because each of these PHI assets are critical assets. Now, as an organization, if you have other critical assets, such as intellectual property that go beyond PHI assets only, then that's fine. Include them in your risk analysis. BA and vendor management, as I said earlier, is a requirement coming down from HIPAA Omnibus. That's mandated and required by HIPAA Omnibus. So it's no longer sufficient that you do your internal assessment and can declare victory. You have to, as a covered entity, you have to declare and work proactively with every business associate and vendors to ensure that they are compliant as well. So BA vendor management is a critical piece that every covered entity, or if you're a business associate, you might have downstream business associates and vendors that you need to manage as well. So the entire liability chain, starting from covered entity to any downstream BA and further BAs or some contractors, the entire liability chain needs to be HIPAA compliant. And finally, there's a need to do risk analysis, which is required for meaningful use attestation. And risk analysis is one of the 14 or 15 requirements from a meaningful use attestation perspective. And but it takes about 70% of the time required to get meaningful use attestation. So a number of meaningful electronic medical record providers might claim that they do risk analysis, but what they are essentially doing is looking at EMR level risk analysis as well. The risk analysis mandated by HIPAA requires you to look across the organization, where EMR is a part of the infrastructure, but not the complete whole part of it. So risk analysis requires you to look at all critical assets inside the organization, across the organization, even assets that might be sitting outside the organization, so that you're able to come up with a holistic risk assessment. I mentioned this earlier, but I want to re-emphasize this, that critical assets really go beyond just PHI assets. If you're a healthcare business, chances are that all the PHI information is really your sum total of critical assets, but you can have other critical information. It could be intellectual property, it could be websites that you want to protect so that it's not hacked in, and thereby your customers are not able to access the website. So operational continuity is an important asset as well. And all of this is really about understanding the criticality of the asset and the value of it, and then how important, what's the potential impact in case the asset gets compromised, and the likelihood that goes along with such a threat happening. So all of these are critical assets when you're starting a risk analysis process, which is what we're going to talk about now. You'll have to look at this holistically and across the organization. So let's get on with it. So let's go to the next level of detail to give you a detailed example of how you would go about doing security risk analysis. So the scope of the analysis is really looking at the entire organization, as I said, where you might have different pieces that comprise PHI handling of information. So you might have an electronic medical record provider, you might have a firewall, you might have people, processes, everything needs to be looked at. And first thing is to understand which are the elements, people, processes, and IT assets that are involved in ePHI storage, access, viewing, or transmission. And it could be client workstations where you're viewing the patient information. It could be because of that you might have to include firewalls because you're transmitting PHI information with other and sharing it with other business associates. It could be because you have a cloud-based electronic medical record provider. So every asset that handles PHI in terms of accessing it, viewing it, storing it, and transmitting needs to be included in this asset repository or asset inventory that you take. The next thing is to, once you've identified the critical assets, you're looking at all the potential threats and vulnerabilities that could affect these critical assets. So if it's an IT asset, you're looking at vulnerabilities that can be exploited. If it's a physical security, like you have a server with the PHI information, then you want to make sure that you have the physical safeguards that cannot be exploited. So locking the server in a server room, etc., are potential controls that you can put in place. So you're looking at every critical asset and documenting all the possible threats and weaknesses that can be exploited by these threats, so that you have a good picture of them. And then you're looking at current security controls. And by the way, these are all also required as part of your HIPAA assessment. And you see these citation numbers: 164.306A2, 8A, 316B. These are the HIPAA citation requirements, wherein when you're becoming HIPAA compliant or doing an HIPAA assessment, you would be required to enumerate and identify them. So HIPAA as a law helps you along to do a thorough security risk analysis as well. But these are the steps that you need to do. And once you do the security controls, then you need to find out the likelihood of the threat occurrence and the impact that it will have, so that you are able to identify the ones that are critical, that will have the highest impact and potentially the highest likelihood of compromising these assets. Those are the ones that you need to really be very careful of. And once you have all these 6 variables, which are critical assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and likelihood impact assessment done, you are able to do a risk determination for the entire organization. So all of these are steps leading up to what is called the risk score or the risk level determination. And once you know what the gaps are and what's the relative prioritization of these gaps, that next step is to come up with the security controls to prevent or to retard these threats from exploiting these critical assets. So that's the really 9-step process that is required for risk analysis. And as I said, a lot of this traditionally is either not done completely or done manually. And we will talk about how to easily automate this process so that it's not error prone, and it's complete, and it's repeatable with very little cost. Because remember, there's a need to do continuous monitoring in an ongoing fashion, so that you're able to stay on top of any changes that happen on a regular basis. So I won't go through this diagram, but this is really the 9-step risk assessment method that I talked about, the process that I talked about. And it kind of gives you information, detailed information about what really is involved in terms of input and output for every step of this process. How do you identify critical assets, and then threats and vulnerabilities and controls, etc., to come up with a recommendation. Firstly, a risk score, and then a recommendation for how to take care of these risk issues that are found. Now, I want to re-emphasize that risk analysis is required when OCR or any government agency is auditing you for HIPAA compliance. Risk analysis is required as part of the HIPAA audit protocol, and along with the other requirements for privacy and security. So this is something that when the 2013 audit pilot program was run by OCR, risk analysis was determined to be one of the biggest issues that were either not completed or incorrectly done So it led to a lot of consternation and potentially lots of fines and follow-ups as a result of that. So this is very important stuff. So it's important that we understand the risk analysis implications and the steps required to achieve it. I mentioned earlier that risk analysis needs to be done in an ongoing fashion because things are changing in the environment, inside the organization, and there is a need to do this on a regular basis. So I talked about gave you a background and gave you information about what does it require to do HIPAA security risk analysis. And as you can see, the steps required are pretty extensive, and there's a lot of moving parts there. And if you do it manually or don't do all of these steps, that's a huge problem. It's very expensive, it's very hard to do, and prone to errors. So Edify is an automated tool that helps you do risk assessments and automate it. Not only that, it's actually a comprehensive tool that takes care of all aspects of HIPAA assessment and risk analysis. So you can use Edify to do your HIPAA assessments. You can do security scanning of all your PHI assets. You can do BA and vendor management, and then risk analysis. So all of the aspects that every covered entity and business associate needs to be aware of, that they need to follow through to comply with the law, to deal with risk analysis, is all built into one application. So there's built-in support for HIPAA and multiple other regulations. There's a built-in scanning tool. There's a built-in risk management framework. You can pick and choose which frameworks that you want to be compliant with, and there are lots of and there's also a knowledge base that gives you complete guidance with respect to what needs to be done, how will it get done, and there's a wizard that will guide you through the process, just like what I mentioned here, so that you're in complete expert hands to understand what the open issues are from a HIPAA perspective and then get compliant. So this is one turnkey solution that does it all, from assessment, scanning, remediation, monitoring in an ongoing fashion is all done by the tool. And the tool has won multiple awards. Recently, SC Magazine gave it 5 out of 5 stars, which is the highest rating in this category. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I want to let you know that the workflow is completely automated by the tool, which allows you to do compliance assessment, security risk assessment. It will guide you through a process of remediation to fix the problems that are found, and then it will monitor in an ongoing fashion any changes that happen. And all this while you will have access to a real-time dashboard that gives you your status from a HIPAA compliance and risk status as well, and you can generate multiple reports. More importantly, you can generate a meaningful use attestation report that can be used to fulfill the meaningful use attestation requirements with the click of a button. So the tool has been designed to take care of all of your HIPAA assessment and monitoring needs, including risk analysis. We've also built an automation tool in Edify that allows you to do a complete risk assessment and automate the process. I talked about the 6 variables that need to be assessed, which can get pretty onerous and pretty exhaustive, to make sure that you're taking care of all your critical assets, all the threats and vulnerabilities that can compromise those assets, and the likelihood impact of such an occurrence from happening. And of course the controls being the protective controls that retard or defeat or decline such attacks from coming through. So all of these variables need to be exhaustively ascertained, evaluated, and Edify has an automated tool that allows you to do all of this very simply with very little heavy lifting, which would otherwise be needed. And you can repeat this process as often as you want. There's a scheduling tool that allows you to repeat this process. So this is the magic of automation that Edify brings to the table. I want to give you a quick flavor of the tool before we open it up for Q&A in the next 5 minutes or so. So there is a dashboard, I mentioned this earlier, where you're able to look at your organization's status. You can look at the overall organizational risk. You can look at the security risk. You can also look at your HIPAA status. All of this is available in real time, and it will guide you through the process of fixing any open issues that are found. By the way, if you want to try out a free community edition, you can download it from edify.com/community and see it for yourself. You can do a initial assessment of your HIPAA compliance status and also know what the gaps are. This is the dashboard that's available to the CIO, where you can have a comprehensive view of your entire organization, and you get to see what different locations are doing if you are a multi-location organization. And as a multi-location organization, you can manage your entire organization remotely without having to go and achieve this by being physically there. You also have access to a risk dashboard. So what that means is that you're able to see what's your current risk exposure. You get access to a heat map to know which assets are the most risky, and also you can look at which controls are affecting your risk posture to the most extent, so that you can work on tightening those controls. The tool has built-in policy documents. There's a policy management portal. So there are predefined policy templates such as BA agreement, your IT policy, how to do risk analysis. There are about 20 plus policies that are built into the tool. There's also a built-in knowledge base, as you can see here, with citation guidance, policies and procedures, parameters. All of those are included in the tool, and you have complete access to best practices that everybody in the industry follows to meet the HIPAA requirements, so that you have complete visibility and complete expert guidance. You can also look at your complete security holes that exist that will be shown by the tool. It will also show you not only the holes that exist, the vulnerabilities that exist, but it will tell you how to fix the problems that are found. So you can do configuration scanning, you can do vulnerability scanning, so that you are aware of what's going on. And as I said earlier, you can generate reports with the click of a button. You can generate report on compliance. You can generate meaningful use attestation reports. These reports will tell you what is missing, which areas you're non-compliant, and which areas are you compliant. For the non-compliant areas, it will guide you and tell you what you need to do to become compliant. So Edify is an automated tool that allows you to manage your HIPAA compliance status, get certified, and then continuously monitor your status to maintain it. HIPAA compliance requires risk analysis, as I said earlier, and the risk automation is clearly one of the biggest elements that is included here as part of automation. So in closing, what I would say is that HIPAA enforcements are ramping. It's important that every covered entity and every business associate be proactive and take steps towards becoming HIPAA compliant. Otherwise, the penalties are very severe. This is also required for doing security risk analysis, which is required for meaningful use attestation, meeting the meaningful use attestation requirements, and getting the federal stimulus dollars. And you can leverage Edify to deal with all aspects of HIPAA high-tech, including being ready and prepared for an OCR audit. If it happens, we hope not, but if it does, then you'll be ready. So Edify can automate your organization's security risk and compliance assurance needs, and it's an automated tool that's available. Let us know if you would like more information on this. And with that, let us open it up for Q&A. So please type in your questions in the questions area, so that we can look at it and respond to your questions. Please type in your questions in the question area of GoToWebinar, and we will pick it up as they show up. Okay, so the question is, how do you compare to rapid fire tools? So rapid fire is mostly a passive vulnerability scanner, and they do part of the overall HIPAA Omnibus requirements. So as I said earlier, to be HIPAA compliant, you need to do a HIPAA assessments, you need to do security scanning, you need to do BA vendor management, and then risk analysis. So rapid fire tools is looking at the security scanning of the assets part of it and any controls that get affected by the security scanning. So it's a very small part of the overall HIPAA certification needs and HIPAA risk analysis needs. Yes, there was a question about MSP program. Yes, we do have a comprehensive MSP program where managed channel partners or managed service providers can become partners. They can resell and offer managed HIPAA compliance services. Please drop a note to me at anupamsahai@edify.com, anupam.sahai@edify.com, or sales@edify.com, and we will help you onboard you as a partner. Could you talk more information about BA vendor management in Edify? Yes, so Edify has built and announced recently that we are going to be launching a business associate and vendor management service that allows you to proactively assess and monitor all the business associates. We had done a webinar in early June, and if you just drop me a note, I can give you a pointer to that webinar or perhaps give you a demo of the solution. So would love to hear back from you. Another question is, do you scan for locations where ePHI is stored? If so, what criteria do you use to ID? So we have the ability in the system to discover any IT assets in the organization. And if some of those IT assets have PHI information stored in those in the server or in the workstation, then the system will automatically detect and scan those IT assets for vulnerabilities. And so that's part of the evaluation process that our HIPAA certification and assurance tool takes care of. So one more thing I want to point out is that Edify is pretty much the complete HIPAA assurance tool. It can take care of all aspects of your HIPAA needs, whether it's HIPAA assessment, BA vendor management, or risk analysis or vulnerability scanning. There are siloed applications or piece tools out there that do bits and pieces of this. And one of the critical values that we bring from Edify is to allow you to be able to integrate all the HIPAA certification needs into one platform, into one solution. So instead of using 3 different tools, one for security scanning, one for compliance assessment, another for risk assessment, you can use one solution, one unified and integrated solution for all of your HIPAA needs or any of the security compliance needs. That's the big distinction. So it's much more cost effective, easier to manage, and that's why we won so many awards in the industry, from the industry, by identifying this need and providing a solution that's pretty unique in the market. Okay, so any other last minute questions before we close the call? If so, please type it in the Q&A section, and I'll give you 1 more minute to type in your question. Okay, so anyway, if you have any further questions or follow-up requests, please send it to me, anupam.sahai@edify.com, or sales@edify.com or info@edify.com. You can learn more about edify.com from this website address. You can download a community edition, which is a free edition from edify.com/community. We look forward to hearing back from you. We would love to hear your thoughts on this webinar or any other topics that you would like us to cover. We thank you very much for your time and attention today, and hope you have a great day. Thank you very much for attending. Bye for now.